Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're going to be discussing the theories of international trade. International trade is a very important component of international economic relations. And so your knowledge of international trade will be enhanced if you understand theories of international trade or theories of international economic relations. But before we begin to look at the theories of international economic relations or the theories of international trade, it's important that we look at the concept of international trade and, of course, the concept of theory. These two concepts are very, very important. What's international trade? What is theory? And what is the relevance of theory? Or, if you like, of what use is theory to you as a student or as a practitioner of international economic relations. Right? So, what is trade? Trade, of course, means different things to different people. Trade is about exchange of goods and services, right? So, you have trade at the domestic level, you also have trade at the international level. And that's why we have trade or domestic trade and we have international trade. But whether domestic or international, the common denominator is that it both has to do with exchange of goods and services. And so the process of exchange of goods and services that transcends national boundary or that is between two or more countries is what we call international trade. And we've always argued that international trade is an inevitable part of international economic relations. Because there's no state that's a state of autarky. Trade relations is inevitable. Every state within the global system must engage in international trade because they cannot survive in isolation. They are not self-sufficient. They are not self-reliant. And so trade is a critical component. You exchange goods and services. Why, for instance, do we have a lot of Chinese companies in Nigeria and in different African countries, even in Europe? Why do we have a lot of American companies in Africa, in Asia, and in different parts of the world? Because these are drivers, of international trade. And so trade is a very important component of international relations. And of course, in one of my videos, I argued that you cannot separate international trade from international politics. These two go hand in hand. So since trade is about exchange of goods and services, what then is a theory? Because the topic for today's conversation is theories of international trade or theories of international economic relations. Theories are tools. They are tools that enables one to understand, to explain, and to predict. So a theory is a scientific mechanism. A theory is a tool that is required as far as understanding international trade or international relations or human behavior is concerned. So there are theories in different fields of study. We have theories in political science, we have theories in economics, we have theories in psychology, theories in conflict resolution and peace building. So in international economic relations, there are also theories. But remember, I said a theory is a scientific tool that enables one to understand, to explain, and to predict. A theory is like a lens that gives clear vision and like a signpost that gives direction. Some may wonder, how comes the crisis between Russia and Ukraine, for instance, is affecting international economy? How comes the crisis between Russia and Ukraine is affecting the price of gas within the international market? How come the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is affecting the price of wheat and the price of bread within the international system? In fact, it's affecting the price of gas. That gives you an idea of the multiplier effect of conflict. However, we are talking about understanding international trade, and I'm saying that your knowledge of international trade will be better enhanced if you understand theories of international trade. Because these theories will help you explain easily, the dynamism of economic relations, the dynamism of the impact of conflict on economics, and the impact of politics even on global economy. So a trade is a very important tool that we must familiarize ourselves with, regardless, of your field of study. Knowledge of theory is very germane. Having said that, what are some of these factors, that propel international trade? Why is it impossible for a nation to isolate itself? Why is it impossible that a nation can choose not to relate, not to trade? So, international trade is precipitated by some factors. There are drivers of international trade. One major driver of international trade is the fact that no state is a state of autarky. That's number one, and very key, that with this, international trade must occur. With this, no trade can survive on its own. So one major stimulant for international economic relations or for international trade is the fact that no state has all it takes to survive. No state is a state of autarky, right? So state must relate. Another driver of international trade are multinational corporations. Multinational corporations are major drivers of international trade, right? So most times you see countries advancing because they have foreign direct investment. And foreign direct investment is a product of, multinational corporations. Multinational corporations are giant business establishments that have their headquarters in their parent or home country and have branches in some other countries. We're going to look at multinational corporation in a separate video because it's a very key, topic as far as international economic relation is concerned. So, number one factor or driver of international trade is the fact that no state is a state of autarky. Number two factor or second driver of international trade are multinational corporations. Number three factor or driver for international trade is globalization. Globalization is another major driver of international trade. And when we talk about globalization, we are referring to the unification of the global system, the shrinking of the global system according to Oran Young. Because of advancement in science and technology, particularly in the area of information, transportation, and communication technology, trade globally has become enhanced. For instance, there are people who live in Nigeria and are able to purchase goods in China and have these goods delivered to them in Nigeria even when they have never been to China. That's globalization for you. That because technology has advanced, you can be anywhere in the world and make purchases. You can be anywhere in the world and carry out transactions. And so globalization is another major driver of international trade. You want to travel, you can sit in the comfort of your house and get your ticket obtained. Right? You can get clientele from wherever you are in the world. People upload videos of their businesses, of their products, and get patronage from across the world. And so the advancement in science and technology has brought about borderlessness, has brought about interconnectivity among countries within the global system. And this is a major boost, for international trade. And so globalization is a major factor. Another major driver for international trade is technology. But of course, you link technology to globalization. However, there are technologies that have no bearing with communication or with information, but they have made production and distribution of goods and services very easy. Right? So technology has made production processes very easy. Technology has brought about expansion of production. And so, with the advent of technology, what sometimes we may want to refer to as the Industrial Revolution, that the Industrial Revolution has brought about technological way of doing things rather than the manual, an analog way of doing things hitherto. So, technological advancement has also brought about, fostering international trade. So these major four factors are contributory as far as enhancing and advancing international trade is concerned. Right. So those are those factors promoting international trade. So we have looked at what international trade is all about. We have looked at what theory is all about. We have looked at the factors that promote international trade. And so quickly, we are going to take a look at the theories of international trade. For the purpose of this video, we are going to be looking at mercantilism, protectionism, and liberalism, right? Mercantilism, protectionism, sometimes we call that nationalism, and of course, liberalism. So I will start with liberalism, or if you like, call it the liberal theory of trade. Very important, the liberal theory of trade. But before I go into that, it's important that as students of international economic relations, you understand that we have been having some form of metamorphosis, as far as economic relations is concerned. Trade is a very old practice. Between countries, within countries, trade has always existed. In fact, some can argue that trade is as old as mankind. And so, in explaining the theories of trade or in explaining international economic relations, it is important that we understand that there are classical school of thought and there are neoclassical school of thought. When we say classical, we are referring to the orthodox orientation, the orthodox explanation of trade. Classical, orthodox, something very old, right? So we have classical political economics and we have neoclassical political economics. All of these, whether classical or neoclassical, have contributed in the study of trade, in the study of the theories of international trade. So having said that, let's take a quick look at the liberal theory of trade. Liberal theory of trade, as its name implies, liberal, or if you like, liberalism. And so the liberal theory of trade, as championed by the likes of Adam Smith, remember that his masterpiece, right, An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, written in 1669 or thereabout, right, 1779, 1779, An Inquiry into the Wealth of Nations, a masterpiece. Remember David Ricardo, his work on the principles of taxation and political economy. These guys are renowned scholars as far as trade liberalization is concerned. And so they fall under the school of thought. They are the major proponents of the theory of trade liberalization. Like I always tell students, every theory you want to explain, it is important that you understand the proponent of this theory, you understand the basic arguments or assumptions or tenets of a theory. Then, of course, you should also be able to do a critique of a theory, right? So we said liberalism or the liberal theory of trade was propounded by the likes of Adam Smith, David Ricardo, Joseph Sonnenfeld, Thomas Malthus also contributed in the study of trade. Of course, to remember Thomas Malthus' contribution when he talked about, food production growing at an arithmetic rate and population growing at a geometric rate. Anyway, that's a different, business for another day. What are the basic arguments of liberalism? One basic argument of liberal theory of trade is that government has no business in business. Government has no business in business, but business in governance. What that simply means is that government has no role in trade. Allow trade, to be governed and regulated by the forces of demand and supply. What we call in economics the invisible hand. So the theory of liberalism advocates for the withdrawal of government involvement in trade. It advocates for the removal of trade barriers, right? Advocate for the removal of trade barriers. Barriers like tax, like import duty, like export duty, and other regulatory mechanisms and policies that government could put in place, to hinder encouraging people from trading. And so the liberal theory of trade, number one, argues that government should not be involved in business, By implication, government has no business in business, but has business in governance, and so business should be left to business people. Business should be left to the forces of demand and supply. What we call a laissez-faire system, right? Another argument of the theory of liberalism has to do with the removal of trade barriers. Remove trade barriers. And what were the arguments? That if you liberalize your economy, if you remove barriers to trade, if government is not involved in trade, what that means is that it will help to enhance trade relations, and when trade relation is enhanced, it will bring about enhancement of economic growth and development within the state, right? Enhancement in economic growth and development within the state. Of course, every state would want to develop. Every state wants to experience economic growth and development. And so the argument of the likes of Adam Smith and David Ricardo, Joseph Somerville, and this, liberal school of thought is that once government offs its hand from trade, once government removes barriers like tariff, like tax, that trade will be enhanced. And that when trade is enhanced, it will also bring about enhancement of economic growth and development within the state. There are so many arguments whether trade can bring about enhancement in economic growth and development or not. I want to try to make this conversation a little practical so that we move a little from theory or move away from just discussing theory to also looking at how this theory can help us understand real life situation as far as the economy within the global system is concerned. Right? So let's take a look at the other theory. Mercantilism is the ancient theory for protectionism. And so mercantilism, protectionism, nationalism, they are all the same. So what we now call economic protectionism is what was hitherto described as mercantilism, right? So economic protectionist theory or mercantilism or nationalism as a theory of international trade is the negation of liberalism. In other words, economic protectionism theory advocates for government involvement in trade and in economy. Remember, this is contrary to the liberal theory of trade, because the liberal theory advocates for government non-involvement. Now, the economic protectionist theory is saying that government needs to be involved in the economy, government needs to be involved in trade. Right? That the involvement of government in trade will bring about protection of local or domestic industry. And to make this practical, I'll use Nigeria as a case study. When Nigeria got independence, and sometimes in the Second Republic, we had boosts in our textile industries. Right? Arewa textile, Kaduna textile. The textile industry was really blossoming. We had people who were employed in the textile industry. In fact, people would rather be employed in the textile industry than employed in the oil industry. That's to tell you the kind of boom we had. But with policy somersault, as government began to liberalize the economy of Nigeria, as government began to remove barriers to trade, where is the textile industry today? They have all gone comatose. Because these textile industries were not protected by the government. The policies of structural adjustment program and other trade liberalization policies of government couldn't protect local industries. And so these local industries could not now compete efficiently with imported materials. In fact, we had importation of textile materials from China, from some parts of Europe, and they were cheaper. And so that that made local textile industries to a point that they couldn't compete with these companies, and they all folded, and the people employed all became unemployed. In fact, so many people who worked in textile industries died because the textile industry collapsed. Now, what does that mean? It means that it will be unwise for a country to practice liberalism in its entirety. Yes, I do not have a problem with trade relationship, because we have argued that no state can survive in isolation. But we have said that even when a state is trading, it is important to put in mechanisms that can help to protect local industries. Because local industries cannot compete, and so you must protect them. You must, encourage a nationalistic spirit that will help citizens to patronize local products. This is very, very important. So there's nothing wrong with liberalism as a theory of trade. There's nothing wrong with nationalism as a theory of trade. However, total liberalization is a catastrophe. And so, one mistake most leaders in Africa and in some developing countries usually make is that they go and take liberal economic principles and paste in Africa, not recognizing the fact that this is a different environment and that you need to look for an approach that works for your environment. And so what we're succeeded in doing in this video is to understand theories of international trade. But we said to understand and appreciate the theories of international trade, we needed to look at what is trade, what constitutes a theory, what are the drivers of international trade, then of course, what are the theories of international trade. And of course, we are going the extra mile to see how we can use these theories, to practice, to understand day-to-day international political economy, day-to-day economy of a country, and how all of these, fluctuates, and of course, policies that are important that government put in place. Because governments in Nigeria, for instance, has come to the realization that there's a need to protect the country, to protect local industries. We now have measures. For instance, the raw material sector, there's a raw material development council in Nigeria that ensures that industries in Nigeria make use of local content, what we call reverse engineering. And so local content, you must source some of your raw materials within Nigeria rather than relying totally on the importation of raw materials. Today we have the Standards Organization of Nigeria as an agency that regulates the quality of products that come into Nigeria. Today we have the NAFDAC, the agency responsible for quality of food and drugs, that ensures that the quality of food and drugs imported or manufactured in Nigeria is healthy for human consumption. All these are protectionist policies. And so protectionism is important, liberalism is important, but total liberalism, total protectionism really may not help a country's economy, to thrive.